I am your host, Jess Williamson, an award-winning business and mindset coach and a serial entrepreneur having scaled 4 successful businesses. My purpose is to help you unleash your unique superpowers and to build the life and business of your dreams. Let's get into today's episode. Hey Milana, welcome back to the podcast. It is the second time you are on the podcast, which is so fun because we've both been on each other's podcast twice now. We just finished recording on the flip side. But what I think is so fun about these conversations is that the first time we recorded together, we were almost in a whole new identity and a whole new space in our business, a whole way of running our businesses. I don't even know when it was, but it wasn't that long ago. And now we're almost both re-emerging as my new rebirthed self. And I think that's going to be such an amazing topic to talk to today.
Well, thank you so much for having me firstly. It's such an honor to be back. And it's so true and so interesting that you say that because it wasn't that long ago that we did record our first round of episodes. And exactly what you said, I feel like a completely different person. I've evolved so much in just those few short months. And I love that we get to bring this conversation to the table here.
Amazing. What I want to touch on today, and you've been sharing a lot of this on your own channels recently, as have I, who the hell am I? Since, COVID and things are over, I think there are so many conversations around who am I? Who do I want to be? Do I want to keep doing the things that I've always done? Or am I ready for a new chapter? So what sparked that for you?
That's so good. And I so fully resonate with that. I think that COVID is probably the whole being locked in, especially where we are in Perth. There was a lot of restrictions and you couldn't leave the country for a long time, even the state. I felt really trapped into where we were. And one of the things was really sitting in that space and time and finding out, who am I now that I am emerging from this cocoon? Who am I as a business owner? Who do I want to be? How do I want to show up? And for me, that started to manifest a lot after I gave birth to my second child, end of last year. So I felt like through having him, I kind of went through a second rebirth myself of kind of a new awakening of wait, who am I now? And it's definitely been the case for me with having kids that it's sparked an awakening. When I had my first child, my son 3 years ago, that was the moment that I really decided that I was not going to be in corporate anymore and I was going to quit my job. And so that led to that kind of life change. And with this one, and I don't know what it is about having kids, but you just step into a more bolder self. And it really coincided with the end of lockdowns and the end of the restrictions. And so it was like, who am I in this new era, this new evolution, and who am I allowed to be and who can I step into? And that all really translated into how I was running my business and showing up and what I wanted to talk about, because I felt like, just like with the lockdowns and being locked in the house, very boxed in with my business the same way. Like I had locked myself in a little corner of who I was, the sales coach, the NLP coach, and I didn't give myself permission to be anything more than that.
Yeah, it's crazy how that works, isn't it? And I haven't had kids yet, but I sold my swimwear brand at the middle of last year. And for probably about 6 months, I was still holding on to that identity. I was the girl with the swimwear brand who had huge success, went to New York Fashion Week, built some other businesses, and also does coaching. That was the identity that I'd created. But also as personal brands, I think this is something that I was musing on in the shower. Personal brands, we almost adopt the identity. So if we're putting out press releases or posting on social media, we're showing up in a certain way that to some extent we then begin to embody that back to ourselves. So a really funny story, just on a side note around like the identity piece, if we don't stop and ask ourselves like, who am I? We can really fall into that trap sometimes, or just continue doing things the way we've always done. And back at the start of my business, I was putting out press releases. I was on Channel 9 News. I was on all these platforms that said 22-year-old business owner. And it was like 22. My website said I was 22. By that point, I think I was 24. And I was catching up with my friends for like a girls' night. And I was like, yeah, I'm 22. Or they said, how does it feel to be like 24? And I was like, what do you mean? I'm 22. And I literally had an argument with them, and they were like, no, Jess, did you think you were 21 like last week or what? And I was like, my mind was blown in that moment because of the story, the narrative. It had ingrained so deep into my mind. And that's like the power of our minds in general. So cool. But I was like, holy shit, I thought I was 22 when I wasn't.
That's so funny.
I was so convinced on it. So we can like adopt this idea of, like you said, you were the NLP sales coach. And if you were doing anything outside of that, it was like, oh, that's not me. Or like, I can't talk about that because it's not aligned to the identity that people see of me, but also that I hold for myself.
Yeah, exactly right. And I mean, we create the box and then we feel obliged to stay in the box, and then other people see the box and they identify us as being in that box, and then it's a cycle, because then they reflect back to us who we say we are, and when they reflect back and they say you're the 22-year-old entrepreneur, you're like, yeah, I am, that is me, and it kind of goes on and on until something happens to awaken you and trigger you out of that cycle, and to break that kind of box apart, break that ceiling and go, well, actually the box, it doesn't fit anymore. It's very uncomfortable and I don't want to be in here. So I need to break out.
Yeah, exactly. So you had the realization that the way I was doing things isn't working or isn't resonating as deeply as it once was. And I think so many people are having these realizations lately, but then people are feeling stuck in like, okay, ready for a next level, ready for something new. But what the hell is that? Like, where am I going? Who am I? Who do I want to be? And that's like one of the hardest questions we can ever ask ourselves. So how did you navigate that?
Yeah, the way that I approach that is I used to ask myself that question a lot. Like, who am I? What's my purpose? What am I meant to be doing here? And I really thought there was a definitive answer to that question, when actually, in fact, the way I navigate it now is I am an ever-evolving, expanding being. And so there is no one answer. And the question isn't so much who am I and who am I meant to be? It's really like, what is lighting me up right now, and who am I in this very moment of my evolution? So what is the thing that I am being drawn to right now? And you were just on my podcast and we talked about human design. And one of the things that really has helped me with answering that question is my design. And as a generator, it is a sacral generator. For me, it is very much the question of what is lighting me up right now. Is that a hell yes or a hell no in my gut? And that is what I follow. Versus when I felt boxed in, I didn't feel like I could do that. I didn't feel like I had the space or the permission to follow the things that lit me up, because I had boxed myself in. And so if something else did light me up, if I was like, oh, I really want to talk about manifestation or human design, it was like, oh, no, like sit back down in your little box and stay there, because that is not okay.
Yeah, so true. And sometimes we come at business with the lens of, cool, I've got this program I need to sell. What do I want to say about it? Instead of just saying, what the hell do I want to say? And how does that then relate back to or lead into some programs, or even just sitting in, let me just say whatever the hell I want to say, and, my business will grow anyway.
Exactly, exactly. And I mean, I've been really leaning into creating things as I'm inspired and the things that I have embodied and I know I can teach someone and lead them through it, whether they fit in a very specific box or not. And that has been so freeing and so liberating and just a whole new level of really being able to express my full self. And it's just been the best thing that I've done this year for sure.
So good. So online these days, we see a lot of cool, started my business, it went up, 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 and it felt so easy. And I did this in one day. Like I reached success in one day, made $1 million. Here we are, quantum leaping, all of this jargon, all of these things, which are great. And I love, and I know you're on board with this. Like I love when people share their success and share their wins and like share their income and all of that amazing stuff. But then sometimes on the flip side, we can feel like something is wrong with us if we're not always on this upward trajectory, if we're not always hitting new targets or new goals with our income, or business feels hard at times. And so I know from my experience, even just realigning to, I don't want to be known as the swimmer girl. It's not who I am. Like it's what I did, and that's an amazing part of my journey, but I am so much more than that. And when I started to change my messaging, there was a bit of crickets. There are going to be people who don't necessarily resonate with the new messaging or the new deeper level of myself that I'm showing up with online. And for me, that was a huge realization around I have potent energy. As a projector, I'm here to be potent. I'm here to see things and say it how it is. But online, I was watering myself down, trying to be liked or trying to be nice, or how will this land with people? Will they like it? So I was like, screw that. Here I am. I'm going to say what I want to say. And that won't necessarily resonate with everyone. So sometimes we can see like dips in our following or dips in our income, or we are working behind the scenes on ourselves so that we can have this rebirth. But then quite often people get attached to the number, the money, the clients flowing in. And when that pauses, they can't quite see the bigger vision in the future. And they're just so focused on now. And now it feels shitty. So I'm just going to revert back to how I did it before, because that worked for me. So what was your experience with that?
Yeah, that's absolutely how I have experienced it, and also seen other people experience these rebirths, these evolutions that we all go through constantly. And something that can really stop you from fully stepping into that evolution, that new level of yourself, is when you allow the gap, what I call the gap, to pull you back. So what I always say is whenever we're growing and expanding and evolving, there is always a gap. And that's the one part that is very rarely talked about. So we see the person that's like, I decided to create a business and then I had my first 10K month the next month and it was great. And now I'm doing like $10 million or whatever. And we're like, wow, that's so cool. But what we don't see is the gap between I decided and then it happened, regardless of how short or long it is. Because sometimes it's like I decided and then 2 years later it happened, or I decided and it happened in a month, or whatever it is. But there's always a gap of this void that we sit in. And the void is where nothing happens, where things stagnate, where you're like, I am now charging high prices. I am no longer the sales coach. I am now this transformational coach or whatever. I don't do ads anymore. Now I do transformational coaching. And then there is a gap because people are not necessarily shifting as quickly as you are. So your frequency shifts quick and people have to catch up. But when that happens, so often we fall back, like you said. We're like, oh, nothing's happening, quick, let me go back to what I knew worked. And we kind of go back to the old. Or if it's not happening fast enough because we're attached to numbers, we've been making a certain income and then now it's dipped. And for me, that was certainly the case. In fact, something that happened for my business was that in the beginning, I purposefully stopped selling for a few months. And there was a dip in my income. I didn't have the recurring revenue to sustain my previous income. And so I saw it coming, but even when it came, it was still uncomfortable. It was still like an, uh-oh, what's going on here? Like, I knew this was going to happen, but should I quickly go and sell some of the things I know will sell that I was selling before to make it up? And the decision to not do that, the decision to stay in the gap, in the void, is where I think is a true magic that is what unlocks your true potential.
So many people don't want to sit in that. And that is the difference between having that truly aligned success feeling business and having a business that you have to show up in.
Exactly. And, it is the most uncomfortable thing. No matter what the gap looks like for you, that gap is really where uncertainty lives. And we crave certainty. We want to know what our income is going to be. We want to know that someone's going to sign up. We want to know that the offer we're putting out will work. We want to know that by showing up, clients will come and they will say yes. And we want the certainty. And so as we're moving through our business, building our business through various stages, what actually keeps us stuck is that craving and desire for the certainty. Because either the certainty stagnates us, we get to a level of certainty, like I know that by doing this thing, I make 10K a month. So I'm just going to keep doing that because that's certain for me. Or on the other hand, when we're trying to evolve, we fall back on the certainty and we never actually evolve past it. If you can learn to live in the uncertainty and to actually sit there in the stillness and allow yourself to be there and recognize that that is a necessary part of evolution and growth, you are going to experience way faster growth than you thought possible, because it's actually by surrendering to that moment that you catapult yourself and you go faster. Even though we're being taught the opposite is true, that we have to do, and then you get somewhere. But actually, it's like when you lean back, that's when you get somewhere. So instead of running across the country, which takes you forever, you lean back and you're like, I'm going to sit on the plane, and you get there so much faster.
Yes, so true. It's kind of like when you're shooting an arrow. I've never shot an arrow in my life, but it's kind of like if you were shooting an arrow and you were just like throwing the arrows towards the target like as fast as you could on autopilot, or if you took the time to like pull it back, line it up, see where you're going and then shoot, you're more than likely going to hit it. And yes, that one arrow might have taken longer, but it's so much more thought out and so much more powerful.
Exactly. Yeah, I love that analogy for sure.
And some conversations that I quite often have or see having or just even chat with my clients online is this idea that we expect instant results, but also this idea in our society where we expect constant ups. And even if you're not going through a massive recalibration of yourself, there are going to be times in your business where revenue dips a little bit. There are going to be times where it's way higher than you ever expected. There are going to be times where you need to keep showing up even when no one's necessarily buying, and trusting and knowing in the fact that every single step you're taking is like getting you closer to that long-term goal. But people are so short-sighted of, cool, I did one Instagram post, no one purchased anything, so better do something different. Better change that up. So I know that you speak to the energetics and you're really stepping into that more, and I'm always on board for like a good mindset chat or like energetics chat. So when that comes to that, it really is leaning into the mindset and energetics. It's got nothing to do with the strategy on the front end around sitting in that uncomfortable moment. So what are some of the shifts that you made for yourself?
Yeah, that is 100% the experience that I've had when I was making these shifts in terms of, okay, I've done these things, I've shown up and it's crickets, well, what do I do now? And for me, coming in from an understanding of this, I knew that I don't get to just show up once and expect results, because that's not how it works. And I think that really holds us back, especially when we see people probably further along than us saying like, I sent one email and I just, booked out my program, and we think something's wrong with us if that doesn't happen for us, because that's what's celebrated. But what I love to celebrate is also the evolution and the journey to get there. And that's what matters for me, not so much the end result. And when I tap into the journey and evolution, the result comes. So when I started to really shift and change my niche and how I was showing up, I was talking to this specific example on a masterclass. I haven't shared it anywhere other than a masterclass that I hosted recently. So I'm going to share it with you now because it's such a potent and powerful example. I was launching a mastermind. Last year I ran a mastermind, an incredible mastermind twice, and it was great. And it had just the most beautiful transformations. And the time came for me to relaunch this mastermind. That was part of my overall business plan. And I was like, cool, launch the mastermind. I did like a very early pre-sale through emails, like on the back end, and had a few people join. And then I was launching it publicly for a little bit, had a few more people join. And so this mastermind started filling up and it generated a big cash flow for me. And as I was moving through my journey of evolution, I realized that the mastermind that I was launching was completely out of alignment with who I am, that I was launching a program that was catering to who I was last year and how I ran my business, and that's how I was marketed, and that's all the messaging, and that who I am now and what I do now and the way I show up and the way I coach is completely different. And so there was this moment of, okay, well, what do we do now? Like, you've already sold spots. You have all of these people. You've generated this massive cash flow. Like, nearly everyone paid in full when they were joining. And I had to sit in that very uncomfortable place and make a decision. Do I want to be the person that I was and go ahead with this? Or do I want to step into my growth? And knowing full well that if I was to let go of this mastermind, I would experience a significant dip in income because I would be refunding all of these people that had said yes. And that's exactly what I did. Every single person that joined, I sent them a personalized message and a video message explaining what had happened, why I was not going to be running the mastermind and I could not run it in alignment with the way that it was structured and the way that, the program promised what I said I was going to be teaching inside. And every single person was sent a refund. Just overnight, I saw just like thousands of dollars just draining from my bank account as we refunded one by one. Just like see that number going down. And that was the most uncomfortable part of the journey and the hardest decision to make, because it would have been so much easier to just say, oh, well, we'll just do it. It's fine. Or we'll just go ahead and try and make it work, versus really knowing in my gut what the right decision was. And in that moment was my gap, because now it was like, okay, now I've refunded all of these people. Now I don't have this recurring income that I was going to be relying on. Now I've shut the mastermind down. I don't have another idea for a new mastermind. And knowing that I'm a generator and I respond, I can't just come up with whatever. I had no idea what I wanted to do next. And so it was just sitting there in that discomfort of like, there is nothing happening. There is nothing moving. What do I do? And the most interesting thing happened from all of that. As I sat there and I allowed that discomfort to be there, I allowed myself to not know. I allowed myself to not be catapulting crazy income months and to actually be in a dip. And as I made room for that, one by one, I started getting messages from people who I had refunded. And first they were like, thank you so much. I love how you lead your business in integrity and how you have made the decision, which I'm sure was difficult. And it's been a great lesson to watch you move through this and how you've handled it. And by the way, how can I work with you one-on-one? What else can I do? And so more than half of the people that were in the mastermind ended up re-signing to work with me in private containers on a much higher level than the mastermind, a higher investment. And all of that money just came flooding back in through these other ways that people were wanting to work with me, that ways that I wasn't even necessarily knowing I would promote or that I would allow space for. And I believe the only reason why that happened was because I allowed myself to sit in the discomfort and to let it be versus forcing something like quick, create a new mastermind, quick, create a new program. And I think the takeaway that I want to leave you guys with is that when you are experiencing growth or there is a moment of there is no sales and nothing's working, you can allow yourself to sit there and feel the feeling. It sucks. Nothing is working. No one is buying. I don't know what to do, and not rush into just doing something because you think you're meant to, but actually feel it, allow it, and then move from that more empowered space to create something new.
Oh, so much potency. And I think that this is such a cool conversation to just be having today, to normalize the gap and to make people feel not so alone in that, but also know that it requires a whole bunch of emotional intelligence, a whole bunch of self-trust, and a deep anchoring into the deeper long-term vision, and not being so fixated on these, quantum leaps in terms of how can I get money as fast as possible. And that is not the way to grow a long-term sustainable business, to build trust with your audience, and to run a business out of integrity and alignment as well. So thank you so much for being so open and sharing that with everyone today. And if you found this helpful, if you're listening to this and you found this helpful, you are going to want to go and follow Milana over on Instagram. And also please screenshot and share this episode if you found it helpful over on Instagram, and tag both of us so that we can just get to know you better, to hear what you think about it, and to share it as wide as possible so that we can change more people's lives and make business a little bit easier and a little bit more fun. Speak soon.
Thank you.